Well, grade 10, great to see you all again with all your cheerful faces. No, I'm lying because I can't see your face, but the bottom line is that I'm happy to communicate with you again. It's been 7 days, so I've missed you. Hopefully, you've missed me a little bit as well. And we're all kind of worried for each other, making sure that we're all sort of wearing our surgical masks and not sort of socializing with in big groups, and that we all wash our hands 10 times a day so that we end up at the end of this rather long journey healthy and wise for the future. I read an article in the paper, I don't know if it's true or not, suggesting that school's not coming back until June. So I don't know what's going on. It's a bit scary, to be honest, but we got to keep going, and we have to be cheerful. That's what Ho Chi Minh would do, and that's what always guides me. So, for that reason, we need to try our best. And to be brutally honest, I think that the government is doing their best because they have succeeded in keeping all Vietnamese people safe. We haven't had a single person die. I think it's the only country in the world. So next time you meet someone from the government or from the administration of Chu Van An, give them a hug and tell them that you appreciate the fact that they have been working hard to keep us safe. You may notice that I've got my tie on today. I got a little bit of a complaint, not a complaint, but one of the students wrote to me and said, "Why is it that you don't have your tie on? You're the only teacher in Chu Van En who wears a tie." So it seems a little bit strange when you're talking to us on the video that you don't have a tie. So for that reason, I put my tie on to make you feel better. As you know, we're going to be moving into a new platform, which is this Office 365 and Teams. Some of you may have worked with it. To be honest, I never have. Okay, this is going to be a new experience for me. I don't know if it's going to be super successful or what, but I'm hoping that it will be a successful experience, and that we need to make sure that it is a success. And I think that the school wants it to be a success, so it has to be a success. I just put my microphone on because I bought a microphone, as I think I told you before. And one of the problems that I had was that my voice was going in and out, and therefore I bought a brand new microphone from uh, Hanoi Computers. And then, to my horror, I suddenly realized that it didn't have a microphone jack. And so very luckily, we found this sort of double jack that you stick into the side of the computer, where it has a microphone jack and a headphone jack. To be brutally honest, I've never heard of laptops these days with microphone jacks. I don't know. Maybe they think that their microphones are good enough and that they don't need to worry about an external microphone. But certainly, if you're giving classes like this for the YouTube or something else, maybe for Teams, for example, this coming week, I don't really think that the microphone in the laptop is really good enough. Um, I just want to congratulate all of you that you handed in your homework, and I mean, grade 10 is so much better than grade 11. I promise you, you know, that every week I know that you guys are going to have done your homework and it's going to be done really well. And some of you who are struggling a little bit, I can see there's improvement every week. So pat yourselves on the back. I'm super proud of all of you. And we may decide to keep doing this. I don't know. I mean, I think it's quite successful. It helps me to organize a lot of my stuff. I mean, I think I'm a really good economics teacher, but I think I'm a really weak teacher in things like sort of making sure that all the papers are back on time and that I have all the marks already and da 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 da. And I find that Google Classroom is just a breath of fresh air, and it really helps me to be well organized. So I look really good when I use Google Classroom, and you get a feedback every single week, and it seems to be very successful. So until somebody tells me not to do it, I think I'm going to keep going on this. And just because you're doing the teams certainly doesn't mean that you're going to get away with no homework every week. So we're going to continue. I'm going to put the video on the YouTube, and I'll tell you the link every week, and you'll have your handout all set exactly as we're doing right now. Each one of you seem to understand it because you do it almost on the first day that it's uploaded. I'm starting to get bam, 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 all the uploads from you having done your homework. And I would say almost none of you are doing a poor job. So really, it's something to be proud of that you're able to achieve this type of level of work during a kind of stressful time. And I don't underestimate the stress that a lot of you are dealing with by having to live at home all the time and, trying to sort of deal with, brothers and sisters and parents making noise, and you're not able to go out and see your friends, etc., etc. Okay, so let's look at some of the questions. I only got, how many questions did I get today? I think I got 2 questions today. The first question is, aren't monetary policies and supply side policies the same thing? Well, that's kind of a good question in the sense that the sort of people who are very much into supply side policies are also the same people who are into monetary policies, but they're not really the same thing. I mean, monetary policies deals with the control of the money supply. And therefore, if you can kind of increase or decrease the money supply by either increasing interest rates or doing something else like the reserve ratio, then you are clearly a monetarist. If you see that as the main strategy for economic growth, is the kind of the adjustment of the money supply. In reality, it's the reduction of the money supply or the slowing down of the velocity of the circular flow. Then you are a monetarist. And supply side, and there is also a Keynesian versus monetarist vision of supply side economics. And so the normal supply side economics is really based on this idea that we need to make businesses happy. Okay, we need to make them feel so happy that they're going to stay here for 100 years. So we're going to do anything they want to. They want to, the government to cut taxes. Oh yeah, no problem. We're going to cut taxes. And you want, the companies want to be able to export their profits without any restriction at all. Oh yeah, no problem. We'll do that for you as well. And you don't like paying workers. Oh, no problem. We'll remove the minimum wage so you can pay them anything you want. Or, we'll ban the trade unions so that trade unions will not really represent the workers and fight in their interests. So these type of supply side policies, which are very much monetarist driven or conservative or free market policy driven, are definitely in the interest of business, often big business, and even more often foreign big business. In other words, multinational corporations. So this would be the typical example of supply side. Now, if you look at the notes, you can see very clearly that there's also this idea of expansionary supply side, where you're trying to find ways to kind of improve the quality of the labor, et cetera, make it more efficient. And that's seen somehow as a concession to the Keynesians to make them feel a bit happy. And so they try to kind of imply that supply side has two sides to it, and in the exam you have to explain it in that way. And I think that in the notes that you got, it explained quite clearly what the two, views of supply side economics is all about. I mean, if you have to be brutally honest, you can see that there are two ways of looking at fiscal policies, two ways of looking at monetary policies, and two ways of looking at supply side policies. In fact, in economics, you've probably got two or maybe three, perspectives of the same thing. And it obviously depends on the interests of the people that you believe that you are representing. If you represent people like business owners, then you're clearly going to be, promoting monetarism and supply side economics. And if you're, sympathetic with the interests of workers and employees and low income people, then probably you're going to be sympathetic to Keynesians or radicals, Marxists. So you got the choice right there, and hopefully that answered your question. The second question was from one of you who said that encouraging more training for the workers sounds more like Keynesianism rather than supply side policies. And that's kind of true. But you probably didn't notice the fact that, that they do like, training of the workers because they don't want to pay for it. They know that the profitability of their business will depend a lot on, how well educated workers are. Can they really follow instructions? Can they, read a manual to explain a machine, for example? Businesses prefer to work in environments where the people are really quite well educated. It's one of the reasons why big business loves Vietnam, because Vietnam historically has been a really well educated society where your culture values education. I mean, I've lived in many, many countries where education is not very highly valued. And I'll be honest, one of them is Canada, where most students couldn't care less about education or knowledge or culture or anything like that. And that's so different here in Vietnam, where most students I meet are super thirsty for knowledge and they're keen to learn, et cetera, et cetera. So this is what businesses really want. So yes, it's true that, encouraging more training for the workers is a supply side idea. But it's also due to the fact that, businesses require workers to be literate and knowledgeable and responsible and stable and all the things that usually come from having, good training, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, the businesses don't want to pay for it. They want the government to pay for it. So they're kind of externalizing their externalities. So really, they see, well-educated people almost like an externality, and they see the cost of paying for it as an externality, and therefore, they want to push that responsibility over to the government. They don't want to pay for training, which probably they should do. If you have, let's say, a Microsoft factory here in Vietnam, surely the Microsoft factory should be paying for their training in very specialized jobs, but no, they want, workers to come away from colleges or polytechnics or universities with maybe computer science diplomas and degrees, et cetera, and they want them already ready and eager to start working tomorrow with the knowledge that they already have. So let's get on to the handout that I gave you. I think it was pretty obvious what we're talking about. This is really kind of like the last topic I can think of dealing with Chapter 5. So we've really come virtually to the end of the AS syllabus. And so what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be going back to the beginning, and I'm going to be continuing what we're doing now, but back to chapter 1. And then eventually, I assume that you're going to be writing your AS paper in, I don't know, I'm not too sure if you're going to be doing it in November or in June the following year. But anyways, I want to make sure, excuse me, that all of you are ready for every topic in the AS syllabus. So let's look at the handout. You can see that this is a typical graph for the cost push and demand pull inflation. You can see that on the left side that there is a shift in the aggregate supply curve, and on the right we can see that it's a shift in the aggregate demand curve. You've got the difference between the aggregate supply and the aggregate demand. So the aggregate demand would mean that there's too many people chasing too few goods. And in this case, on the left-hand side, you've got basically the cost of inputs are going up, which could in fact be caused by foreigners or imported inputs, or it could actually even just be maybe from labor costing more in Vietnam or whatever. But often the monetarists love to blame foreigners for this whole issue because they feel that they're the ones who have caused the problem, not themselves. They look kind of innocent when they're being accused of causing inflation. So the first thing that we learn is we know the definition of what is inflation, and that's a good way to start if you ever get an essay question where the word inflation is there. The first paragraph should really be to explain what is inflation. And one of the definitions that I've looked up, I've seen about 5 different definitions for inflation, but this is a good one, I think. It's a measure of the rate of price increases in an economy for a basket of selected goods and services, which really kind of sticks in the whole issue of the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, for you to sort of kind of understand that, if bread goes up by, doubles in price, that's not inflation. It has to be kind of a general trend in the economy. And how do you measure that trend? It's by creating, or the government creates, this basket of goods where the people can actually see from all over the country as to whether the prices of basic commodities, goods and services are going up or not. And of course the issue, and I don't want to get into this because this is not the question, but the problem in dealing with this is obviously your basket of goods is a lot different from mine. What you would consider to be the average level of consumption of a family of 4 over a period of 30 days, would be, probably, lots of expensive items. And now you're all complaining that Mr. Christopher is sort of suggesting that you're all kind of rich. But it's not really about you. It's about, the population in general, that we have obviously a heterogeneous selection of people in Vietnam. Some people are rich and some people are poor, and you can really only go on average. And so therefore, the average Vietnamese person may basically just eat rice all day and takes a bus to work, or the rent is fairly low, et cetera, et cetera. So if your kind of collection of goods that you would consume in 30 days might be very different from, what you in your family would have as an average basket of consumption for 30 days. So that's one of the problems that we face. But really, the real question that we're asking here is not what is inflation, is that we have to think about whether, when people say, is inflation serious, or is it a bad thing, or how bad is it? Well, you got to answer the question is, well, first of all, you got to say, well, how much inflation is there? I mean, obviously, if you got 1%, you got inflation, but that's not as serious as if you have 20% inflation, because obviously your purchasing power of the consumers is dropping dramatically. And obviously, if you're living in a country like Zimbabwe, where I lived for 5 years, you would know that is really serious, because it's now 1,000,000% inflation, where prices were doubling every day, and it changes your manner of consumption. You no longer save any money. You just spend it as quickly as possible. So the first thing is, how much is the inflation? And the second one, which is relevant to this question, is how did that inflation take place? Like, what is the cause? What is the root cause of this inflation? And whether you're a Keynesian monetarist, supply sider, Marxist, whatever, you need to be able to explain to people what is the cause of this inflation. And if you don't know the cause of this inflation, you're not going to be able to solve the problem. So for that reason, it's important for you to know, is it demand driven or is it supply driven? Okay, and then of course, politically, everybody loves pointing fingers at each other. They, oh, well, that's your fault. No, 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 no. This is not my fault. It's your fault. And that's what happens in the West. That inflation becomes a political football where everybody's blaming everybody and nothing gets done. I mean, one of the nice things about the Vietnamese government is that that they are trying to get the ball rolling and getting the economy rolling, and we don't waste a lot of time just sort of, criticizing each other. We're all looking for a constructive solution to the problem. Okay, so you can see the difference. Okay, it says that, that the demand pull inflation is an upward pressure on prices that follows a shortage in supply. Economists describe this as too many dollars chasing too few goods. Okay, and then the cost push inflation is the upward pressure on prices due to increases in the cost of wages and raw materials. Okay, often those are foreign wages and foreign raw materials, but not always, but they often are from imported goods and services. The key now is to say, well, now that we know what the inflation rate is and we know the cause of this inflation, well, what are you going to do about it? It's not quite good enough in this day and age to say, oh, well, this is, isn't it a pity? Or, oh, well, maybe God is angry with us. Well, you need to think, if you are even slightly progressive and that you do value the role of government in solving macroeconomic problems, you need to say, well, what are the solutions to controlling demand pull inflation? Well, the sad reality is that, this is really meaning that if it is serious, and even Keynesians, if it's really serious, they will almost do exactly the same as what the monetarists will do, and they're going to start, changing the income tax, and they're going to kind of reduce spending, which will slow down consumption, because when governments spend a lot of money, this benefits consumers usually. Things like the interest rates. If you increase the interest rates, you're going to actually make borrowing a lot more expensive, and for that reason, less money will be in circulation. The discount rates, which is the money that is borrowed from the central bank to the commercial banks, that will probably be raised as well to kind of encourage commercial banks to raise their interest rates. The central bank, of course, is kind of controlled by the government, and for that reason, often governments who have a certain policy will instruct the central bank that we want you to increase the discount rate in order to discourage greater spending, because we're worried about an overheated economy where inflation is on the horizon, for example. How about on the cost push side? Okay, this is something that's talked about a little bit less. monitors hate to discuss it because they're kind of dealing with this issue. Certainly, if they see that imported inflation is coming into their country, one kind of tricky trick to solve the problem would be to allow the exchange rate to appreciate. In other words, for the dong to go up in value. So rather than being, what is it now, 23, it might go to 15. So if it was 15.15, then you could buy a dollar with 15,000 dong. So by doing so, what are you really doing? Well, you're making it easier to pay foreigners for debt or for bills that you owe. Of course, the Saudis may not be very happy with that because they're going to feel that they have been manipulated and that part of their payment has been stolen from them. So if they are unconvinced that you are sincere in what you're doing and that you're kind of not messing around with imports, then what they might do, of course, is demand payment in dollars. And a lot of commodities are often paid for in dollars. So, it's one of the reasons why a lot of governments are now moving towards the Chinese currency or some international new currency, maybe the euro even, just because they feel that this sort of manipulation is too common and that they're getting cheated from payment by allowing their currency to appreciate. So that would be one issue. And certainly another one would be just more supply side policies, which in theory would make, the economy more competitive and cut their costs. And this will make it easier for, the domestic economy to pay for these extra input bills that are going up. You could actually lower taxes, business taxes, in order to enable businesses to pay their bills better. But I'm not convinced on that one. I'll be honest with you. I think that if you lowered business taxes, probably the CEO of the company would probably just give himself an extra bonus at the end of the year rather than helping the company to pay their bills. So I personally wouldn't be sympathetic with that, but that is a common strategy, thinking that if you make the company a little bit more profitable by lowering taxes, this will help the business to pay for all these increased input charges. Okay, so whether changing the exchange rate works or not to reduce inflation would depend on how these foreign firms respond to it. Well, that should be obvious, but it is in the book and it's in the syllabus as well. And therefore, the whole issue of elasticity comes into it. In other words, how responsive are these companies to a change in interest rates? How responsive are they in responding to a change in exchange rates or any of the policies done to control um, cost push inflation? It's difficult to say, because some companies may be very responsive. The moment they see that the exchange rate has changed, that they're going to it's going to change their pricing policies, perhaps, or if governments decide that they're going to cut taxes, that they're going to respond in a certain way. But there are no future, people who can read the future, and so that's kind of difficult. But certainly, the elasticity in how companies respond to government policy would be a valid sort of concern, and it would be something that governments would take into account when they make these policies. If they feel that businesses don't care and they're not even interested in what the government policies are, then you could probably cushion the economy quite a lot by introducing a lot of these policies that are supposed to reduce uh, the cost push inflation. We have at the end, which I thought was a really clever little addition, because I remember last year in grade 12, we had an issue of what should we look for as evidence as to, what is cost push and what is demand pull. And, how do you know that something is cost push inflation? Or, if you're trying to decide, should I do this policy or that policy? Well, the first step is to know, are you dealing with cost push or are you dealing with demand pull inflation? And the list there that I gave you at the end is really quite clever. And they give you an idea as to what to look for when you're trying to make a decision as to whether this is cost push or demand pull. I think it was 3 years ago on the AS paper that they had a question related to this very issue as to how you can identify whether inflation is either cost push or demand pull. And you need to explain why that's important, because as I said to you, first you need to know how big the inflation is, and then you need to know what is the cause of it, because you're not going to solve the problem if you don't know what the cause is. Okay, so that's about it for today's handout, and we have two homework questions. The first one I actually took out of an old exam paper. Why are Keynesians more open to criticism regarding demand pull inflation rather than monetarists? Well, that should be a pretty easy question, because Keynesians are the ones who are heavy into the aggregate demand game, where they're always saying that, the cause of any macroeconomic disequilibrium, that's how they call it, is caused by inadequate aggregate demand. And therefore, they're the ones who are going to be criticized when there is demand pull inflation by the monitors. But I want you to develop that question so that you get a good result on the homework mark. And second of all, why are foreign imports often blamed for exogenous cost push inflation? Okay. Now, exogenous, as you should know, which is the opposite of endogenous, is exogenous is when you have really no control over the activities of something. Like, if there's a world war and you're running a hotel in Vietnam, that's an exogenous issue because you have no control over that world war. Or if there's a worldwide recession or depression, you have no control over that, so therefore it's exogenous. So the question here is, why is it that imports are often, and almost always, by the way, but it depends on the situation, but they're very often blamed for the cause of this cost push inflation? That, certainly monetarists are big on ducking responsibility, and they're going to sort of say, well, it's not us, it's somebody else out there, and therefore, they're going to believe that, it's caused by people trying to raise the prices on us, and that's actually causing the inflation. Okay, so there's a little bit of, in the answer, you need to sort of kind of explain the dynamics of, Keynesians and monetarists blaming each other for it, and that they need to find kind of an excuse. And anything that's exogenous is a really good excuse, because it means that you have no control over it. So it's kind of like saying it's not my fault, that if Saudi Arabia decides to actually increase the price of oil, well, how can you blame us? We never did that. So obviously there's going to be a knock-on effect where these oil prices that have gone up in Saudi Arabia are going to affect the Vietnamese economy, because everything is delivered and everything needs oil, and everything requires transport. Workers need to get to work, etc., etc. So it should be a pretty easy question. So I'm going to wrap that up, and I just want to remind you to wear your mask and to make sure that you're not chatting in groups. with all your buddies, and that you're washing your hands at least 10, maybe 20 times. My fingers have been washed to the bone. So I'm kind of a bit of a hypochondriac, which is a kind of a fancy word for saying that I'm a bit scared of getting sick. So for that reason, I'm washing my hands all the time, and you should too. So I'm going to say bye-bye for now, and I'm going to wait for that 100% response by the homework. And I'm looking forward to seeing you next week, as well as starting on Monday on the Teams software. So this is going to be an interesting thing. I've never done it before, and I assume you've never done it before. I don't even think that Chu Van Anna's done it before, but we're going to learn together, and we're going to probably make lots of mistakes in the beginning, but it's going to be okay. Okay, so bye-bye for now. Bye-bye.